Welcome. Settle into a comfortable position, let your shoulders relax, and allow your breathing to find an easy rhythm. Tonight, we will drift back nearly 2,000 years to the city of Rome during the reign of its second emperor, Tiberius Caesar Augustus. Although history remembers him for the troubling decadence of his later years, our journey begins not with scandal, but with the quiet rhythms of daily Roman life. Before we consider the shadowed corridors of imperial palaces, we will linger first in the humbler corners of the empire, among the streets, markets, and homes of the people whose lives carried on beneath the gaze of emperors. As you listen, imagine yourself wandering those streets. Imagine the soft crunch of gravel under sandals, the faint smell of wood smoke in the air, and the low murmur of Latin voices all around you. The city may have been vast and noisy, yet within its many districts and courtyards, life unfolded at a gentle, steady pace. Let us begin there. Imagine yourself awakening in a modest Roman insula, a multi-storied apartment building that housed much of the city's population. The room is simple: whitewashed walls, a low wooden bed, and a small niche where a clay oil lamp flickers faintly. Outside, the early morning light filters through a small shuttered window, painting the air with a pale gold glow. The streets below are stirring. You hear the creak of cartwheels as a vendor pushes his wares, the rhythmic clip of hooves on stone, and the first calls of market sellers. The city of Rome never truly sleeps, but in these first hours of the morning, there is a softness to the sounds, like the beginning of a slow and steady song. A woman across the courtyard leans over her balcony to shake out a blanket, sending tiny motes of dust shimmering in the sunlight. The smell of baking bread drifts from a nearby pastrinum, the neighborhood bakery, where round loaves are being slid into communal ovens. It is a smell that has comforted Romans for generations, warm and steady, much like the rhythm of their lives. For the ordinary Roman, breakfast is simple. Perhaps a piece of coarse bread dipped in watered wine, or a handful of olives. Children sit cross-legged on the floor, chewing slowly, before running off to their lessons with a tutor. Fathers and mothers make their way to their trades, some to workshops filled with the ringing of hammers on bronze, others to market stalls lined with baskets of figs, dates, and fragrant spices brought from across the empire. As you walk through the bustling forum, the great heart of the city, you notice the marble columns rising above you, their surfaces worn smooth by countless hands that have brushed against them. Pigeons wheel above, their wings flashing silver in the light. Around you, people haggle, greet one another, and carry on in a rhythm that feels eternal. And yet, beneath this sense of permanence, there is also fragility. Fires are common in the crowded wooden tenements. Disease drifts silently through narrow alleys. For many, life is a constant balancing act between survival and comfort, between hardship and fleeting pleasures. But still, the rhythm of Roman life carries on, steady as the flow of the Tiber River. Imagine pausing at a fountain in the middle of a small square. Clear water spills from a carved stone spout into a basin below, its gentle trickle soothing to the ear. Children splash their hands, laughing softly, while older men gather nearby to discuss politics, philosophy, and the latest rumors from the imperial court. The empire, after all, is never far from anyone's thoughts, even in the most ordinary moments. The daily lives of Rome's people form a steady backdrop against which the dramas of emperors and generals unfold. While Tiberius would one day retreat into isolation and excess, the people of his city continued their rituals: the baking of bread, the tending of hearths, the endless cycle of work and rest. As you walk away from the fountain, the city seems to exhale around you, alive yet calm, humming with countless small lives. And so we drift, slowly and gently, from the streets of the people toward the story of the man who ruled them. Now that we have walked among the ordinary people of Rome, let us turn our attention to the man who reigned above them, Tiberius, the second emperor of Rome. His story is not one of sudden glory or dazzling charisma, but rather of duty, restraint, and, eventually, retreat. Imagine the young Tiberius, born in 42 BCE, in the twilight years of the Roman Republic. His family belonged to the ancient Claudian clan, a line known for its sternness, its austerity, and its unyielding pride. From childhood, he would have grown up in an atmosphere of discipline and order, surrounded by the expectations of his lineage. When Tiberius was still a boy, Rome was convulsed by civil wars. Julius Caesar had fallen, and alliances shifted like sand beneath the waves. Amid this turmoil, Tiberius's mother, Livia Drusilla, remarried to none other than Octavian, the man who would become Augustus, the first emperor. This union would bind young Tiberius to the heart of imperial power, though he could not have foreseen how deeply that bond would shape the course of his life. As a youth, Tiberius was not the sort to command attention in a crowded room. He was tall, serious, and quiet, with eyes that seemed always to be observing, measuring, weighing. Unlike the fiery orators and dashing generals of Rome's past, he preferred silence to speeches, contemplation to celebration. Yet, beneath this calm exterior lay a formidable mind and an iron will. His early career was marked by military service, where he distinguished himself with steady competence. Imagine him standing before his legions, the standards fluttering in the breeze, his voice steady as he gave commands. He led with discipline rather than flamboyance, earning the respect of soldiers who valued his reliability in the field. Campaigns in Germania and along the Danube showcased his ability to secure Rome's frontiers, and whispers spread that he might one day hold the empire's highest command. But Tiberius's life was never entirely his own. His path was shaped by the will of Augustus, who, in his careful and calculating way, arranged marriages, alliances, and adoptions to secure the imperial succession. At times, this burden pressed heavily upon Tiberius. He was compelled to divorce the woman he loved, Vipsania Agrippina, to marry Julia, the daughter of Augustus. This was no union of affection but of strategy, a reminder that even the most powerful were often pawns in the grand game of empire. In time, Augustus adopted Tiberius as his son, ensuring that he would inherit the mantle of emperor. For Tiberius, this honor was a mixed blessing. He possessed the qualities of a capable ruler, yet he seemed to shrink from the public glare, preferring solitude to ceremony. When Augustus died in the year 14 CE, the Senate declared Tiberius emperor. Thus, with quiet reluctance, he assumed the purple robes of power. As emperor, Tiberius was cautious, even hesitant. He often deferred to the Senate, unwilling to appear too domineering. Some praised him for his restraint, while others accused him of weakness. Yet in matters of finance and administration he proved astute, strengthening Rome's treasury and maintaining the empire's stability. His reign, at least in its early years, was marked by order rather than chaos, by careful governance rather than reckless ambition. And yet, beneath this surface of calm efficiency, shadows began to grow. Tiberius's natural reserve deepened into suspicion. The intrigues of Rome, the whispered plots, the endless rivalries, wore upon him. Trials for treason multiplied, creating an atmosphere of unease. Friends became wary of friends. Words once spoken freely were now weighed carefully for fear of imperial ears. Over time, Tiberius withdrew further from public life. His retreats to the island of Capri became more prolonged, his presence in the capital increasingly rare. It was there, away from the eyes of Rome, that rumors of his private life began to circulate, rumors of excess, of indulgence, and of acts that shocked even a city accustomed to scandal. Whether these tales were true or embellished by enemies, they became part of his legacy, staining his reputation and casting a long shadow over his reign. As you picture this aging emperor gazing out over the sea from the cliffs of Capri, you might imagine him as a man torn between his sense of duty and his desire for escape. A man whose life was shaped by power, yet who often seemed weary of its weight. His story is not one of bright triumphs, but of complexity, of a ruler who maintained the empire's strength even as his own spirit retreated into isolation. And so, with the life of Tiberius before us, we gently shift toward the next part of our journey, the mysteries and cultural echoes that surrounded him and the island of Capri that became both his refuge and his prison. Let us drift now from the marble halls of Rome to the quiet, windswept island of Capri. It lies in the blue waters of the Bay of Naples, a place of rocky cliffs, hidden caves, and gentle breezes carrying the scent of salt and wild herbs. To many, Capri was a paradise, a retreat from the bustle of the city. But in the reign of Tiberius, it became something more, a stage for rumors, legends, and enduring mystery. Imagine yourself sailing toward the island in a small wooden vessel. The sea glitters under the sun, and the waves lap steadily against the hull. As the cliffs of Capri rise before you, their limestone faces gleam white, their edges softened by olive trees and wildflowers. Birds circle lazily overhead. From a distance, the island seems serene, almost timeless, a sanctuary carved by nature. Tiberius came here in the later years of his reign, seeking distance from the intrigues of Rome. On these cliffs, he built a series of villas, grand complexes of stone, terraces, and gardens. The most famous of them was the Villa Jovis, perched high above the sea, its commanding views stretching across the glittering horizon. Even now, centuries later, the ruins of Villa Jovis remain, their walls weathered yet enduring, silent witnesses to the life once lived within. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of those spaces, long corridors that once echoed with footsteps, cisterns that gathered precious rainwater, fragments of frescoes painted in soft colors. Walking through these ruins today, you might hear the faint whisper of the wind threading through broken arches, carrying with it the distant voices of a vanished world. Yet Capri's tranquility was shadowed by the stories whispered about the emperor. Ancient historians, particularly Tacitus and Suetonius, wrote that Tiberius retreated into excess, surrounding himself with indulgence and secrecy. They claimed that the villas became places of moral corruption, where the emperor abandoned restraint. Some accounts paint him as a recluse haunted by paranoia, lashing out against perceived enemies while indulging in pleasures that scandalized even Rome. But here we must pause. History is never so simple. The sources we rely on were often written years after the events, colored by political bias and the desire for dramatic tales. Was Tiberius truly the monster they described? Or was he simply an aging ruler who preferred solitude, whose stern demeanor made him an easy target for rumor? The truth may lie somewhere between. What is certain is that Capri became a symbol, not only of the emperor's withdrawal but of the imagination of Rome itself. The island's caves, such as the famous Blue Grotto, with its waters glowing an otherworldly azure, fed the sense of mystery. To the Romans, such places seemed touched by the divine, or perhaps by darker forces. Imagine standing within the Blue Grotto. The entrance is low, and one must bend to pass through. Once inside, the cavern opens wide, the ceiling arching high, the water illuminated from beneath by refracted sunlight. The surface glows like liquid sapphire, and the air feels cool, hushed, almost sacred. One can imagine Tiberius, or perhaps his courtiers, being rowed across those luminous waters, the flicker of light playing across stone and skin alike. It is easy to see how such settings might give rise to stories of secret rituals, of hidden feasts, of shadows where the line between truth and myth blurred. Capri became, in the minds of Romans, a place where the emperor was no longer bound by the watchful eyes of the city, a place where power was exercised in solitude and secrecy. And yet, amid these dark tales, Capri remained beautiful. Its olive groves continued to sway in the wind, its vineyards ripened in the sun, and fishermen cast their nets along the shore as they always had. Life for the island's inhabitants carried on, steady and familiar, even as their emperor became the subject of whispered legends. When we walk today among the ruins of Villa Jovis, or gaze across the waters from the island's high cliffs, we are left with questions as much as answers. Was Tiberius truly the tyrant described in history books? Or was he simply a man weary of empire, choosing exile in beauty, only to be condemned by the pens of his successors? The stones of Capri do not answer. They remain silent, timeless, holding their secrets within the rhythm of the waves and the endless whisper of the sea breeze. And so, with Capri's mysteries lingering softly in our minds, let us turn, at last, to contrast between the life of emperors and the lives of Rome's elite, between the excess of palaces and the restraint of ordinary existence. As Tiberius withdrew into the seclusion of Capri, the rhythms of Roman society continued without him. To truly understand his reign, it helps to step back and view the world he presided over, not only the splendor of imperial palaces, but also the quiet routines of senators, aristocrats, and the countless ordinary people who gave Rome its heartbeat. Picture, for a moment, the Roman aristocracy. These were the senators and noble families who lived in grand domus, townhouses with central courtyards, mosaic floors, and painted walls that glowed with soft pigments of red and gold. In these homes, mornings began with formal greetings, the salutatio, where clients, those dependent on the favor of powerful patrons, lined up at the door to pay respects. The aristocrat would receive them in a columned atrium, sunlight filtering down through the open roof above, the sound of trickling water from a fountain nearby. Afterward, the day unfolded with the measured cadence of business and politics. The Senate met in marble halls, its debates echoing with carefully chosen words, though true power lay always in the shadow of the emperor. Some senators thrived on intrigue, weaving their fortunes around imperial favor. Others lived cautiously, aware that a misplaced word could bring suspicion, exile, or worse. Contrast this with the life of the ordinary citizen. The majority of Romans lived in cramped insulae, apartment buildings where several families might share a single staircase, their daily lives spilling into narrow streets. For them, leisure meant visiting the public baths, where warm water, steam, and conversation provided a few hours of comfort. In the evenings, they gathered in taverns or lingered in open squares, their laughter mingling with the clatter of dice games and the faint scent of wine. The public spectacles of Rome drew together all levels of society. In the amphitheater, senators and commoners sat side by side, though separated by rank and privilege. Gladiatorial games, chariot races, and theatrical performances entertained the masses, reinforcing the sense that Rome was eternal, unified, unshakable. Yet even here, the emperor's presence, or absence, was deeply felt. Without Tiberius in the capital, Rome sometimes seemed like a stage without its central actor. This contrast, between imperial solitude and public bustle, between the luxury of palaces and the modest routines of ordinary lives, defines much of Roman history. The emperor may have retreated into his villas on Capri, but the empire itself continued to function, powered by millions who never set foot on that island. Bakers rose before dawn to knead dough. Farmers bent to their fields under the Italian sun. Soldiers patrolled distant frontiers, their shields glinting in the light. Life in Rome was a vast, interconnected tapestry, with the emperor woven into it but not always visible. And then there were those who lived on the edges of power, the philosophers, the poets, the dreamers who found meaning not in politics but in reflection. Some wrote verses praising the golden days of Augustus, others whispered laments about the uncertainties of Tiberius's reign. In their writings, we glimpse the soul of Rome itself, restless, creative, forever questioning, yet always bound by tradition. Imagine yourself now standing on the Palatine Hill, the heart of imperial Rome. Behind you lie the sprawling palaces of the Caesars, their arches casting long shadows in the evening light. Below, the forum hums with activity, merchants closing their stalls, children chasing one another between the columns, priests carrying offerings to the temples. From this vantage point, the contrast becomes clear. Above, the solitary power of the emperor. Below, the enduring rhythm of the people. It is within this tension, between isolation and community, luxury and simplicity, power and vulnerability, that the reign of Tiberius unfolded. His retreat may have drawn him away from Rome, but the empire endured, carried forward by the countless lives lived in its shadow. And so, as we reflect on these contrasts, we prepare to close our journey, bringing together the threads of daily life, imperial biography, mystery, and society into a gentle conclusion. And so, our journey through the world of Tiberius comes to a close. We began among the narrow streets of Rome, where bakers tended their ovens and children chased one another beneath the watchful eyes of neighbors. We walked in step with the ordinary people whose daily rhythms shaped the heartbeat of the empire. From there, we turned our gaze to the life of Tiberius himself, a man born into duty, bound by family and politics, who became emperor almost reluctantly, and who carried the weight of Rome on his shoulders. We followed him across the sea to the island of Capri, where the cliffs rise like white sentinels above the blue water, and where legends, whether true or imagined, grew like vines around his memory. There, amid villas and grottos, he withdrew into solitude, leaving behind whispers that echo still. And finally, we reflected on the contrasts that defined his age: the grand halls of aristocrats and senators, the cramped tenements of ordinary citizens, the bustling forum alive with voices, and the quiet retreats of philosophers and poets. All were threads woven into the same vast tapestry of Rome, an empire immense and enduring, yet filled with fragile, fleeting lives. As you settle more deeply into rest, consider this: history is not only the story of emperors and battles, but of countless small moments, meals shared, lamps lit, footsteps across stone. The Romans, like us, lived with hopes, with worries, with laughter, and with silence. Across the centuries, their world feels distant, and yet, in its quiet details, it remains strangely familiar. Take a slow breath, and let the weight of the past dissolve into stillness. The echoes of Rome fade gently now, like the tide pulling back from the shore. The sound of sandals in the forum, the whispers of senators, the murmurs of waves against Capri's cliffs, all soften, all drift away. What remains is the comfort of the present, your own quiet space, the steady rhythm of your breath, and the calm that history, in its long and gentle unfolding, has offered tonight. Close your eyes and let the empire of sleep embrace you.